Do you have a personal definition of free will that you think it?
No.
Okay. You mentioned once that you like, hey, I do the rituals of Judaism. I don't consider myself well, you consider yourself a practicing Jew, but not a believing Jew in the sense that you consciously believe it, but maybe unconsciously you do. In a Petersonian sense, your behaviors are reflections.
Did you say Petersonian?
Yes.
I didn't know there was a Petersonian.
Yeah. I like to use the word Petersonian. It's easier for me.
Okay.
Okay. Well, do you pray?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Now when you pray, who do you feel like you're praying to? If you don't, if
Whoever's around.
You literally, as in people.
Oh.
I know you're joking, but I'm actually I'm actually curious. And please forgive me if this is too personal.
No. I mean, I think it has to do with the idea that the concept of prayer is a conserved concept in the human psyche. So you have widely separated groups who come up on the idea of prayer. And I think it's because the human mind has an extended phenotype, if you will, of behaviors. So, we build churches and mosques and synagogues and all sorts of houses of worship. That's part of our extended phenotype. We gather to sing. Do you pray?
I try to.
What tradition did you grow up in?
I grew up in, my family is Christian, but then I became an atheist as a young person after my brother told me about quantum fluctuations. Because I always wondered, well, how the heck could something come from nothing? And then one time my brother was walking with me to Blockbuster. This is how long ago it was. And he mentioned, yeah, well, there's something called quantum fluctuations. And then I remember sitting up in my bed and just thinking, well, there doesn't have to be a reason for God. So I was an atheist, and now I'm unsure. I would say that I hope I'm religious, because, well, we can get into that conversation.
Well, I'm pretty much of an atheist. If you take, let's say, the lyrics of, Forever Young by Bob Dylan?
I don't know too much of music.
No.
I'm not a musical person. I play music, but I don't listen to it.
Yeah. Starts off, may God bless and keep you always. May you promise to be true. May you always do for others and let others do for you. May you always be courageous, stand upright and be strong, and may you stay forever young. It's an absolutely beautiful song that gets tremendous power from the form of, right?
It gets tremendous power from the form?
The form of a prayer.
Okay.
Right? If you think about Madonna's Like a Prayer, if you think about, I've talked about AC/DC's song, You Shook Me All Night Long, which uses these four notes. Yes, you shook me all night long. Very similar to Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Like the power of those four notes. I don't know you, but I want you all the more for that. To deny this as part of the human endowment is crazy. So, yeah, maybe you're not going to go to synagogue, and then you're sitting there and you're doing what? You're singing You Shook Me All Night Long, and it's erotic, it's sacred, it's profane, it's all of those things that animate us, and the contrasts and the contradictions and the run-ins and the weird juxtaposition. So I think that you have to recognize that prayer has a function in our minds that we only partially understand, having nothing necessarily to do with whether there's somebody on the other end of the phone when we place the call.
Eric,
you sing when you're alone?
Yeah.
What are your songs?
And even when I'm not.
What are some of your favorite
Unfortunately, songs? Interestingly, I love Nirvana, so I love Kurt Cobain. And one of my other idols is Kurt Gödel, and my name is Kurt. And that's just complete. I wonder if that's a correlation or if it's cause, or if it's just
You
coincidence.
may be losing your marbles, but okay, yeah.
So Nirvana, Our Lady Peace, Alanis Morissette are like 90s.
Yeah. Well, if you think about Kurt Cobain, there's something very sort of, I think that there's something very blasphemous and very sort of profane about his alienation. And honestly, it's better when it's animated by its relationship to religion, a little bit.
Wait, okay, sorry. Explain what you mean there. That Kurt Cobain's music is better when it's animated by its relationship to religion. What do you mean?
Um, well, if you just take a line like, she's overboard and self-assured, I know a dirty word. What is a dirty word? Right? Clearly, that's animated by religion. Did somebody say damn and you have to have your mouth washed out with soap in the 1920s? I don't know. So,
I see. So you're saying that music is made richer when you appreciate religion or you merge it or you understand it in the context of religion?
Well, like I was talking about, what did I say before? The most scandalous thing about what did I say was the merging of sexuality and gospel. So he stops in the middle of the song and he goes, and his backup singers go, and he goes, oh. He's going in through this grunting ritual, which is clearly extremely sexual, with a gospel feel to it. Well, I can tell you that there's nothing quite so transgressive as the concept of sacred sexuality with the choir. So that song has the power to shock us precisely because a different standard was referenced. And I do think that the tension between reason and religion and between superstition and ritual versus our metacognitive facility, which says, why am I doing these things? That's been incredibly potent. It would be very weird to throw religion out once you realize that it's not literally true, but yet many people do that.
Right. And that also has the sub claim that if you don't believe in religion as it literally is, then you're not Christian or you're not Jewish. And I was speaking with Peter Glinos, who's a specialist in the history of religion. He was saying that if you go to early Christianity, early Judaism, like third century and 300 or 200 BC as well for Judaism, that to think of the Bible as literal was also a sin for some sects.
You can say whatever you want. These are tensions that don't get resolved. And most of the I think I've said I know 5 or 6 rabbis well enough to ask the question, do you believe in God? And none of them do.
Eric,
Not
thank you.
Standard, typical, trivial sense of, I believe that these stories are literally.
I'm curious about your use of language. Sometimes even Brett in the most recent podcast said, Eric, you do use terminology that I'm pretty sure you know that the interlocutor is unaware of. So, for example, with you and Anna, you use the term expansion point to describe the media. And me as a mathematician, I know what expansion point means, but I'm pretty sure Anna doesn't, and I'm pretty sure that you know that Anna doesn't know. So I was curious, why would you use that? Another example was when you were being asked about Bitcoin and you said something, this is locally conserved. This is like local conservation law, something like that. And I'm curious why. Why do you use esoteric language? Now, here's some theories. So someone might say, well, you're trying to sound intelligent. And or another one might be, well, this is how you think and you're thinking aloud. Another one might be, well, you're trying to provoke curiosity in the audience. Well, I don't want to give you some answers, but I'm curious.
You did an excellent job of answering your own question. I'm not interested in sounding intelligent because that's going to cut down on my estimation of intelligence, probably, and it's going to cut down on my listenership. So, to be blunt about it,
just a minute, babe. Just a minute.
To be blunt about it, I think there's a difference, which is, why does this language even exist? Why don't you ask the people who live inside of every single discipline to conduct themselves so that if their grandmother barges in, she'll be able to follow the conversation? I don't know where that became a good idea or a gold standard. There's a quote of Feynman's that everybody likes to throw at you, which is, that which I cannot create, I do not understand. Or another one, which is, if you can't explain something, to every man, then you don't really understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Horseshit. It's nonsense. We develop certain language for a reason, because it's well tailored to what it is that we're thinking about. So, let's take the case of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is frequently advertised as digital gold. Well, what is gold? Gold is a physical element. It's created from the fusion of stars, where stars collide, and that allows us to overcome certain barriers so that the protons can fuse together. All right, so gold is effectively based on a nucleus, which is fermionic, and that fermionic nucleus is a wave, and that wave behaves in a physical sense. Now, what is the quintessential issue about gold? Is that it's hard to produce. It's hard to fake gold. You can't just go print up a bunch of gold because you'd like some gold bars. So, of course, if you could put water and dirt into your Smithson 5000 machine and have gold bars come out the other side, gold wouldn't work as a form of currency or as a store of value. So what are the properties abstractly of gold that makes it work as a store of value? Well, the fact that if I have a gold bar, you do not, and if I give you the gold bar, I no longer have it. That is a conservation law. And the fact that I can give you a gold bar in my backyard and nobody can stop us from making that transfer has to do with the fact that it's locally enforced. I don't need to go to a central authority and permit. Like, if I have money in a bank account and I wish to put it in your bank account, we have to involve the banks in the transfer. Okay, well, this is a locally enforced rule with gold. And it's because gold is conserved. The amount of gold I give up to you is the amount of gold that you now have that I do not. Now, that's how I think. Now, do I constantly want to be referenced to some standard whereby the source of my thinking is covered up? No, effectively, the way I'm using language is a bit like scaffolding for a building. I'm leaving the scaffolding up so that if you're confused by what I'm saying, you have a hope of not only saying, well, that's interesting, but you can also say, I wonder where he got it from. Oh, his language is a clue. I'm going to find out what a conservation. So by leaving the scaffolding up, I feel like it's actually an invitation to people who are more interested to figure out where this stuff comes from. So if I have some paradigm in the theory of natural and sexual selection, and I talk about it in terms of natural and sexual selection, I'm giving you the pointer, the metadata, the hyperlink, to go find out where I got my thinking from. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm giving you extra. And if you're put off by that, that's really your problem, not mine. And I guess I started deciding that I would use my own native language. My own native language is a version of English with a Creole or pidgin on top of it, made from the languages of the fields that I draw from. It could be economics, physics, finance, risk, computer programming, music, molecular biology, evolutionary theory, architecture, wine, whatever these things are, they're all sources of inspiration. And so I guess I actually just reject the charge. And I find it very infantile that people imagine that it's an affectation. I think I just gave up not talking the way I natively think. So at some level, you're looking at somebody else's code, and I probably use a pastiche of different programming languages, if you will, where most people agree that they're going to write programming in some very restricted set of command. And my feeling is, well, your restricted set of commands aren't sufficiently expressive. Now you see, I've just done it again. Expressive is a concept that you would talk about in the comparison of computer languages. But my point is that that's the natural paradigm for me to explain the thought. Do I want it? You said to me earlier, you asked the question, how is it that you always have sort of a contrarian or original answer no matter what question gets asked? And in part, it's exactly this. It's that I try to look at to all the different fields for what they excel at and borrow whatever I can learn from them about how to think about various paradigms. And then even to see the same paradigms crop up in fields that are widely separated and nobody knows that the same way of thinking occurs across them all.
I think that's one of the ways that you are able perhaps to integrate the knowledge. Because one of my earlier questions that I didn't even say was, if these fields are so variegated and they seemingly have nothing to do with one another, although if it's a part of this world, there's some connection, how is it that you're able to keep all this knowledge in your head? Because, for example, I took an economics course in university, but I've forgotten most of the fundamentals. And I blame that partially on not using the knowledge on a regular basis. I was like, well, does Eric use his knowledge? Well, how does he use it? Perhaps he uses it in conversation. Now you're actually giving credence to this idea. And then I thought, well, maybe also he uses it when he writes. Maybe he writes privately and it's constructing some theory on his own. That's why I asked you about writing. So this whole conversation was an attempt to deconstruct you.
I see. Well, I would say that I just have more room in my brain because I've decided not to keep track of the Kardashians.
If you enjoyed this Toe clipping, then the full video is linked in the description. You should also sign up for Toe Mail, which is again in the description and the pinned comment. You'll receive immediate access to all exclusive updates from the Theories of Everything podcast. It also helps me communicate directly with the core Toe community. You'll also receive my top 10 toes. Think of it as the intellectual version of Quentin Tarantino's Obsession.